Does sight reading at the piano intimidate you? Do you read at a level that you know is far below what you actually could do? Are you one of those people who shies away when somebody gives you music to sight read? If so, you're in the right place, because in this video, I'm going to go over some sight reading strategies that can help you improve your game at sight reading at the piano. Today, I'm going to talk about sight reading at the piano and give you some advanced tips that I share with my university students. So let's get started. Okay, so if you want to improve your sight reading, it's super important to practice your sight reading consistently. Even if you're an advanced player, it's easy to underestimate the importance of sight reading practice. Now, personally, I don't claim to be the world's best sight reader, but I do find myself needing this skill a lot in my professional life, like when I'm teaching my students and demonstrating at the other piano, or if I'm learning music for a performance. For example, last year, I was hired to play 4 pieces on a contemporary music festival with an orchestra. Now, the orchestra only had 2 short rehearsals before the concert, and the music was really complicated. Each piece had a different style, and as I said, it was all contemporary music, and there were a million notes for the piano. And if I weren't able to sight read at a decent level, it really wouldn't have been possible for me to accept that gig and learn that music in time for the first rehearsal, especially in light of the fact that I have to spend quite a bit of time each day teaching, and I have other repertoire to practice. And then I also have administrative responsibilities as a college professor, like email and committee work and other kinds of responsibilities. Sight reading is something that improves with practice, but like a foreign language, it also gets worse with neglect. Chances are, if you neglect your sight reading practice, your proficiency will decline somewhat, and that can lead to a vicious circle where you don't feel comfortable sight reading music because you don't think you're good at it, and then it continues to decline and so forth. That's why it's vital to keep continuously improving on your sight reading and creating that virtuous circle where you notice gains and positive feedback. The suggestion that I share with my students is to dedicate about 15 minutes a day practicing sight reading. If sight reading is a new skill for you, or if it's a struggle for you, then why not take the sight reading challenge? The sight reading challenge is something that I coined for my students, which is just that you are going to commit to dedicating 15 minutes a day for 30 days to consciously work on your sight reading. When my students take the 30-day sight reading challenge, typically they notice an improvement after the first 2 weeks, and then by the end of the 30 days, they feel much more confident, and that encourages them to continue practicing their sight reading. When you're only taking 15 minutes a day to sight read, I recommend using the time so that you don't just play through one thing one time and move on, but instead pick a shorter section, read it several times, and then that'll be your 15 minutes for the day. I'm going to show you in an example. I'm looking at this Mendelssohn Song Without Words. What I would recommend doing is taking a section of it. For example, I'm looking here at this repeat sign that happens at the bottom of the 5th line, and then maybe that'll be your segment for the day. Or maybe even just 2 lines. It really just depends on your level of ease when it comes to sight reading. This might also not be the right level for you, which is totally fine. You can pick an easier or a harder level. This is just an example for this video. But then what you would do is you would sight read that segment and then practice it a little bit. Find the parts where you made mistakes or things that you need to look at more closely. Maybe some left hand, I see a left hand jump there in the 3rd line. So maybe I'm going to want to practice that and then sight read it again, then practice it a little bit again. And each time you sight read it through, give yourself a new challenge. Like maybe you want to get more notes on the second time. Maybe you got a lot of notes already the first time, but you played it very slowly. And so the second time you want to increase the tempo just a little bit. Or maybe you played the notes and the rhythms pretty well, and it wasn't too slow, but you didn't do any of the dynamics. And so you want to do more musicality and dynamics on the repetition. So use your 15 minutes every day by picking a short section of something and then sight reading it several times. I would say 3 to 4 times in that amount of time. And then that would be your sight reading exercise for the day. Then the next day you can pick something else. Okay, now we've established that you're going to be sight reading daily. That's great. When you go to sight read and you first open your music, before you begin playing your first sight reading piece, take a moment to scan the music. Over time and with practice, you're going to want to get to the point where it takes you 30 seconds or less to scan the piece and be ready to play it. Now, the reason I say 30 seconds is because often in collaborative settings, you won't have the luxury of spending more time on this step because someone will be standing there or sitting there waiting for you to be ready to begin playing. Especially if you're an advanced player, it's tempting to believe that you can dive right into a piece without scanning it first. I'm guilty of that myself. I can be an incredibly impatient person. However, before you just start playing, you really need to do your best to understand what the piece is about. Just like when you pick up a book, for example, you usually have an idea of its genre before you just start reading, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, mystery, thriller, or another kind of book that you enjoy reading. Similarly, when you sight read a piece, keep in mind that the music on the page is not merely a collection of notes and rhythms you need to accurately reproduce. I know, it's so obvious when I say it, but this is so easy to forget when you're sight reading, especially if you're feeling pressured in any way. It's actually music that you're going to try to bring to life from the page. And so taking a moment to figure out what the thing is that you're about to try to do is going to go a long way at helping you succeed at it. During your quick scan of the music, do more than just note the time signature, key signature, patterns, and accidentals. Beyond that, try to comprehend the musical content of the piece that you're about to look at. Does it resemble something you've played before, even if the notes are different? Can you identify the type of music it is? So, for example, is it a dance? Is it a sonata movement? Is it an invention or an aria? And if it's a dance, what kind of dance is it? If it's a sonata movement, where are the main themes and how do they go? These are things you can learn to do pretty quickly in just a few seconds. Also, try to pre-hear some of the musical shapes on the page. Even if you can't precisely hear the notes in your head, attempt to get a grasp of what the music might sound like. Also, what is the music about? What is its character or mood? Pay attention to any dynamics and expressive markings that the composer wrote, because these provide insight into the piece's emotional direction, and that will help you when you sit down to play the piece at sight. By taking this comprehensive approach to scanning the music, you'll be much better equipped to bring the piece to life when you start playing it for the very first time. This is a Haydn sonata, the slow movement of a Haydn sonata, and it is 4 pages. And I'm seeing here in the middle a repeat sign, and so that implies that it has some kind of 2-part form. It looks like a little bit of a coda here, maybe. And I'm looking for recurring motives. So one thing I'm seeing a lot of is these descending groups of thirds. I see that quite a bit. And actually that looks like that's somehow related to this. Also this, a little bit related. This is descending thirds. So I'm seeing that figure recur throughout. And that's given me a little bit of a feel for how the piece is put together. There's a lot of descending scalar passages. This whole section here is based on descending scalar passages, even if it's not identical to what I have been circling. This looks like some kind of sequence that's happening. Another thing I notice is that the opening motive has a dotted rhythm that then ascends by an octave, and then we descend. So I'm looking for these dotted rhythms at the beginnings of bars. The other thing I'm going to look for is what is the character or the mood of this? This is an adagio. It's in 3/4 time. And so that is telling me that it's a slow tempo and that the main beat is going to be quarter notes. And yet I'm seeing a lot of faster rhythmic patterns. I'm seeing 30 seconds here, for example. I'm seeing this kind of improvised looking ascending scale in those places. And I'm seeing a lot of triplets, a lot of 16th note triplets, and a lot of dotted rhythms. So that tells me that it's going to be somewhat stately. And the improvised rhythms tell me also that there's probably going to be some kind of vocal quality about it. And so my approach to this is going to be as, for example, an opera aria or solo singer, and that the accompanimental chords and triplets will be very, very quiet in the background to support that singing melodic line. That would be my approach before I even start reading the piece. Now, if you're a pianist of any level trying to become an advanced sight reader, It's time to move beyond simply identifying notes by their letter names. You need to be thinking about something different. The name of the game here is intervals, intervals, intervals. Look at it like this. If you're proficient at reading words, you don't need to look at each individual letter in a word in order to understand it. You look at how they fit together. How do all the letters fit together? And then you grasp the letters in relation to one another. And that allows you to know how the letters sound next to each other. And then your brain can scan these groups of letters and internalize them as complete words. This is an analog to reading sheet music. As you read, the important thing to notice is the distance between the notes on the page. Don't get too caught up in the note names. That's the equivalent of looking at each letter of the word you're reading. To make the transition from thinking about note names to thinking about intervals, it's incredibly helpful and actually quite important to have a solid understanding of intervals. So I'm going to do a quick overview of recognizing intervals. Odd-numbered intervals are all line to line or space to space on the staff. So that's thirds, fifths, sevenths, and ninths that are all space to space or line to line. And even-numbered intervals are space to line or line to space jumps on the staff. These include seconds, fourths, sixths, octaves, tenths, and so on. It's beneficial to remember intervals based on how they look on the page, and you can start thinking, okay, it's line to line and it's this wide, so it's a fifth. That's how you can learn to quickly scan and recognize intervals. Once you've strongly connected the visual aspect with how it feels to play that interval, you'll be well on your way. The key here is to read music intervallically. Teaching yourself to do so is going to just skyrocket your ability to sight read. So this is the same slow movement from the Haydn Sonata. And I'm noticing at the very beginning, this is before I even play anything, but I'm noticing this is a C major chord. I'm noticing this is stepwise motion here. I'm noticing thirds there, and that's an ascending octave. I can tell very quickly by looking at it. My pulse is going to be eighth notes because it's a slow tempo, and I see a lot of 16th note triplets, so I want to feel it in eighth note pulse. So now I'm imagining the tempo at the beginning, and here we go. And 3. Now an octave, stepwise motion. This is outlining a C chord. And the hands are going in opposite direction. I have a seventh, sixth, and then C chord in first inversion. And then that's a suspension, very common to see a fourth to a third. That's a 4-3 suspension. And I know that's a C major chord. I can scan that and so forth. And so you can see that really I'm not looking at individual notes. I'm not saying, okay, that is, let's see, C, E, G, C. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying, oh, C major, I know that. That's an old friend. And so then in this line, the third line, you can see in the left hand, there's just triads. So I can scan that one time and say I never have to look at that again for the whole rest of the bar. And then I see this chord. The lower two voices move up one white note to there, and then I go back to here. So I can also recognize that as a very common chord progression. And then I can see that this is a scale. And of course, I practice scales every day, as should you. And so I know that's a G major scale because I see the F sharp in it, right? And there's no sharps or flats in the key signature. Plus G major is the dominant of C major. And so it all fits together in terms of theory. The good news is that learning about intervals is easier than it's ever been. There are so many helpful resources out there that can help you really internalize intervals and how they look on the page. You can use flashcards that you can buy or make yourself. You can use an app on your phone or computer to review and learn intervals. You can use a music theory book to learn about theory and do practice exercises. One resource I recommend to my students for interval identification practice is the website musictheory.net. It's free, it's online, easy to find. They have a section of their site that's specifically for interval identification practice. The way it works is you set it up according to your own level of skill, and then it'll just give you example after example to practice drilling. Regardless of which resource you choose, these sorts of music theory and interval review resources will give you a solid foundation for understanding and scanning intervals quickly, and that will elevate your sight reading skills to a whole new level. I made a sight reading checklist that goes systematically through all the foundational things to look at when you're first scanning a piece before you play it. You can download that by clicking on the link that's in the description below. I'd love to hear any questions or thoughts you have about sight reading in the comments section of this video. And if you enjoyed this video, you might want to check out this video right up there as well, where I'll show you some sight reading apps that are designed to help you improve your sight reading. Thanks for watching. Please hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Happy practicing.